It sucks to have to manage your team closely, especially when most good people, they already want to grow. So how do you let them know why they're here, how they can help, and how they can solidify themselves in their jobs, consistently getting better and better results on behalf of the company? The funny thing is, when we talk like this, it sounds like money and business aren't really that important, but the person is almost like touchy-feely. And some might ask, how do you keep people happy and expect them to be productive? The answer is probably a little more businessy than you think, because you do it through KPIs. If people can see how their job affects the big picture, they can own it. They get away from being order takers and they actually become people who understand their job. The KPIs let them know why their job mattered. So that's all great, but lots of people try to use KPIs and fail miserably. So what does it take to use the concept of KPIs effectively in your organization? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. But let me point out one quick thing. If it's not easy, it doesn't happen. So there are some things we do, even though they're hard, right? So this statement isn't completely 100% true, but how many times have you told a friend you wanted to go to lunch and you really meant it, but it just never happened? It's because it wasn't in the schedule. It wasn't easy. And so if you set up the path of least resistance to lead to success, then it'll be easy. It'll happen. All right, so let's talk about how to do that. So there are three main ways that I want to talk about to do that. How do you make the path of least resistance also the path to your KPIs? Well, a couple ways. So you meet with your team regularly. You also, in this step, you make sure to let them know how to prepare for the meeting. Then you define what to measure. They're less likely to be dissatisfied or feel like, KPIs that they help create. It's hard for them to feel that those are irrelevant to their job because they helped create them. You're saying, okay, we created these together. And so now you're kind of opening the door for them to know how to interact with you on them. If you're just like, hey, here are your KPIs, you're like, all right, I have some questions about that. But ultimately, if I want to be successful at my job, you've of course thought through these thoroughly, right? We don't always think things through thoroughly. How much better is it to just work with them and just say, okay, hey, I know my job, what I need to accomplish. Let's discover some KPIs that fit with you, that make sense to you, that solve the problems that you see in your part of the organization. And then let's help those help me. And so what you're doing is you're asking them to tell you how to manage them and how to work best with them. And that's how you're going to get the most out of people. Everybody knows that, right? If they suggest them, they probably understand, right? So how often have you delegated something to somebody and it was just hard to get them to understand what you're asking them to do, and they're asking questions and you're like, I don't understand why you don't understand this. But if you tell them the problem and then they come and they say, oh, hey, I think I can solve it by doing this, then you're like, instead of you telling them, you're asking them, what do you mean? How's that going to help solve the problem? And then they're like, oh, well, you see, because this. And then they give you a good reason. You're on the same page now. You're not telling them how to do it because that's too much work for you. You're not going to get as much done. So ask them to suggest 3 to 5 of the most important things in their job they think they can measure. Then ask them to explain to you why these are the most important things to measure. First one was meet with your team. Second is define what to measure. The third here is audit month, find out, hey, are you on track? If you're not, let's talk about it. Let's find out why, and let's find out what we can do to help. You review the KPIs. You ask them which areas they reached and which they didn't, like what KPIs did you satisfy at this point and what didn't you? And then ask them what they'll do to fix what's broken and how to build what's working. Look, if you have a half an hour or an hour every month to do this, don't go over your time, just prioritize. If something needs to be talked about, take your time and talk about it. It's cool. The main thing is that you're helping them reach their KPIs because that's what's going to help you reach your KPIs. The fourth thing is you ask which areas are most promising too. Meet with them regularly, define what to measure, audit monthly. Point is you're getting them on your team, and KPIs that's what they're all about. It's all about aligning everybody on the same team. Keep in mind, KPIs are a part of it. There's also the culture aspect where the values come into play. So don't be afraid to talk about values. If they're like, it doesn't feel right to do this KPI this way, don't just be like, well, you're supposed to do the KPI, so do it any way you can. No, it all has to be done on the values of your company because as Pat Lencioni says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I agree with that. If you have a good culture and you're working well with your team, everybody's on the same team, and you're going to be able to accomplish so much more than if you have a killer strategy, but nobody trusts each other.